Welcome to AI to Z, your gateway to the world of STEM and the careers shaping its future. Hosted by Airswift's Chief Revenue Officer, Anna Frazzetto, we delve into artificial intelligence, health tech, and more. With insights from industry leaders, Anna not only demystifies STEM, but also highlights the exciting career paths within. Whether you're an enthusiast, a professional, or considering a STEM career, tune in and journey with us into the future.
Hi, Wayne. Welcome to the show. Typically, when I start one of the podcasts, I always like to do a little bit of research, and I took a look at you on LinkedIn, and what really struck me is your About section. I'm just going to read it to share it with the audience. Keen to help you on your AI and intelligent automation journey. In order to make sure you don't make the early adopter mistakes I did all the way back in 2010. Well, let me show you how to get automation working for you. Well, what struck me about that, Wayne, is the fact that you're referring to automation and AI back in 2010. And of course, the world is acting today as if artificial intelligence was just invented with ChatGPT. So welcome to the show.
Thanks, Anna. Great to be here. And yes, I really should. I can't believe it's already been like so long. And you're right, it is. It does feel like the rest of the world has opened up to AI, and I do feel like I have been doing it for such a long time now.
Right. So why don't we get started? I think let's talk about why hasn't automation brought up the transformative changes that were predicted years ago, right? Shaping the world in the ways that it was envisioned.
Yeah, I'm going to say it's people. People and process is the reason why technology, any form of technology, doesn't get as widely adopted or see the value that maybe the marketeers would highlight that you can get from it. And the reason is, we people, humans, are incredibly complex and absolutely brilliant. And so when we try and replace anything that we do as people, it's significantly harder than what most people would actually expect. The human brain, even now, is still greater than any of the commercially available AIs out there. And so when you're trying to automate work, what you're really trying to do is replace the best problem-solving capability that we've yet to invent, the human brain. And so, the reason why it's taken so long for many organizations to automate is, first and foremost, the simple stuff. Okay, you don't really use your brain that much, but as soon as you get into the vast majority of work, unbeknown to most people, because it's never written down in process documents, you are constantly problem solving, and therefore, you're adding complexity. And that complexity for many automation tools is just not something that you can replicate, which is why, at least historically, we've got to a point, we've hit a ceiling in the realms of automation. And then we've got a little bit stuck. And I would say, today, in today's world, with things like ChatGPT and other generative AI models, perhaps we're starting to break through some of that ceiling. But certainly up to date, I think the main reason why automation has not delivered maybe the significant transformation that most people may have expected is, work is a lot more complex than most people give it credit for. And organizations have probably not understood this as well until they really have tried to replicate this work, these processes. And I guess, over the last few years, that's definitely kind of come to the fore.
Right. So wait, what do we need to do differently moving forward for automation to be more prevalent?
Well, I think moving forward, first of all, you need to understand, okay, there's a realization here that work is a lot more complex, and that we maybe haven't give credit for how complex work is. We probably haven't given the time needed to understand our processes. And we also designed work with people in the middle of it. And so if we're really going to change the boat, we need to rethink how work is done. And I'll give you a great example. I was on the phone with a client yesterday, and we were looking at an audit. And I won't go into significant details, but the audit, basically they took information out of a core system of record and they put it in an Excel spreadsheet, and the reason they did that is so that they could color code it so that they would have a visual view of what was going on. A technology doesn't necessarily even need that, right? The reason why they were taking it out of a system of record and putting it somewhere else was a very human reason. They wanted to see something visual that gave them an understanding of the progress that they were making. Technology doesn't even need that, right? But this work has been designed for a person to complete. And if you extrapolate that across most things that we do in the enterprise, that's exactly what we've done. We've added a human need to work. And so if we're really going to be serious about automation, we need to rethink a lot of the stuff that we do through the eyes of technology. Technology doesn't necessarily need some of these things that we've put in place, some of these complexities, some of these additional steps. So we really need to redesign work with technology in mind. And I think that is a long-winded process. It's not quick. If you imagine, the average number of processes that it could be in most enterprises is probably somewhere from 2 to 10,000 processes / micro tasks. It's not an easy task to rethink that amount of volume and that amount of work. It's a significant effort. But I think I think there is a realism now in most enterprises that if we do rethink work through the lens of technology, alongside seeing improvements in the type of activity that technology can do, that the future is a lot brighter than, say, the last 5 to 10 years.
Right. But Wayne, I think you really kind of hit on something that's very relevant and being discussed today, is taking that human element out. Are we now losing sight of what we're trying to build and create? There's definitely fear associated with taking the human element out. If anything, there's lots of discussion right now talking about how do you maintain, the human touch, even though we're talking about generative AI. So I think it's an interesting predicament. You bring up a very valid point, starting with a clean slate. But I think it's going to be a tough balance. I mean, what are your thoughts? Like, how do you balance that?
Well, interestingly, I would suggest that 70 to 80% of all work doesn't need a human touch because it doesn't actually touch an end customer. We're thinking here about back office type transactions, things that happen in the engine room of an organization. And the only thing that actually touches either the requester or, the customer, whether it's B2B, B2C, whatever, is the outcome, right? They're interested in the outcome. As long as the outcome is delivered in a human-like fashion. How it gets done, do we really care? Probably not. Now, I think, again, you bring up a really interesting point. The key thing here is about applying a human touch to points in a process, points of engagement that really matter. And so, one of the things that when I think about customer service, so, customer support, customer service is one of my big passions here. The vast majority of transactional type activity, do I want a person? Not really. I'll give you another example. Yesterday, I'm redoing my home insurance and car insurance here in the US. They love to add a human into the mix. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. Look, this is a transactional activity for me. I have already spent time on a website. I've put some information in. You give me a price. I set the price, and then you say, I need you to speak to a person to complete this. That is both frustrating and actually turns me off the company. I don't want to. The entire point of me doing all of this online is that I want to complete the transaction online. I don't see the value personally of adding a human into this. Now, the company does. Why? Because they probably want to upsell and cross-sell. They want to make sure that I'm getting the right coverage. Great. And for some people that might be fine, but give them the option as opposed to don't allow me to complete this transaction entirely autonomously. So, I think adding the people in the right place at the right time is what will differentiate experiences in the future. This is not that everything in the world needs to be automated. This is, use people where they are best, where they'll add the most value, and when they're wanted, as opposed to just have them in the mix, because that is historically how we've always done work. And so, for the back office, the vast majority of transactions that happen in an engine room of an organization will never touch the requester. It's only the outcome. And therefore, let's remove the people from those type of processes and just add them into the areas where they really matter. We're getting closer, I think, to being able to unlock when and where that is. And what do I mean by that? Well, historically, I would suggest that we understood contact and high-level reasons, how and why we were engaging with our end customers. What I don't think we really understood is context. And the reason why we didn't understand context is because we were only viewing under a microscope a certain number of interactions across our business. And so we had a slither of understanding which would extrapolate across our entire organization. AI and automation now are adding an ability to, not just look at a slither, but to literally look at every click, every screen, every underlying system, everything that is said, and provide you with insights all the way down to a category, a subcategory, and a sub-subcategory. Suddenly, we don't just understand the reason; we understand the context. And so, when you add in all of that together, we can be in a different place. We can truly understand when and where it's valuable to add people. I don't think we had the understanding before, and so we just had them everywhere. So I think there's a really interesting tipping point where an organization will, for the first time, I would suggest, truly understand when and where people should be involved in process. And context versus contact, I would suggest, is the next big wave that we're going to ride on in the enterprise.
Right. So Wayne, as you're talking about this, it kind of reminds me of just like, when there's been significant impacts in technology and the pendulum swings, right? So what winds up happening is we go from one extreme to the other extreme, like you described, buying insurance, and then everybody has to talk to somebody. But there should be an option, to your point, right? That you can be flexible where, do I want to speak to a person or don't I want to speak to a person? This is part of the pendulum swinging where a company says, okay, we're going to make this, one size fits all. Everybody's going to have to follow these rules. But then there'll be some learning along the way, and hopefully the feedback from buyers that they'll kind of balance it out and maybe have an opt-in, opt-out type of option. I think the fear is also around, people, in the sense of, elimination of jobs. How do we retool individuals? Because I've seen it in history. Like when you take a look at, whatever happened to that COBOL programmer from the 1990s. Well, they're long gone. They either reskilled, learned a different language, or learned a different technology, or they retired because they didn't want to deal with the change. I think sometimes as employers, it's hard to approach work in a way that is non-human related, if that makes sense, but really looks at it from a work perspective. I love this conversation because I really do think it touches on so many icky things that are happening that make organizations and companies feel a little bit uneasy. Wait, let me ask you this. As we kind of peer into the horizon of work evolution, we've kind of been talking a little bit about that. What does the landscape of the future hold? I mean, you mentioned some things, but a lot of it almost sounds like we're on the brink of a Skynet type of danger zone, right? The technology is going to take over the world. How do we kind of navigate this path?
Well, the good news is I would suggest that technology is not going to take over, but we as people are going to be augmented significantly by technology. If you actually look at one of my job titles on LinkedIn, it says helping organizations understanding the real AI in automation, and the real AI is augmented intelligence. So augmenting versus replacing in the main. So yeah, the current set of automation technologies, as we think about generative AI, is very much copilots. Copilots are the current kind of buzz, I would suggest. Microsoft have got one, and that's going to be really interesting for those who are in and around the Office suite. Google have a similar one. A lot of the automation technologies that I work with and work alongside clients with are creating their own copilots. Copilots are everywhere. Are they replacing the developer, the knowledge worker, the contact center worker? No, they're not. And interestingly, there's some really, one of the things I like to do is I read a lot of research. I need a lot of research in order to make sure that I have an understanding at a data level. What's actually going on? How do we separate the hype from the reality? And there's been a few papers recently around this. So the good news is, although 50% of jobs and roles are going to be affected by things like generative AI, this is mainly focused around generative AI because it's the latest hype. Although 50% of jobs are going to be affected in some way, the vast majority of them don't get removed. They just change. And I think about this, with the same stuff, as I look at RPA, for example. Very, very simple technology. Really wouldn't suggest that it was even closely linked to AI. But what ChatGPT and generative AI are doing to higher paid creative roles, RPA was doing to back office transactional roles, a decade or more ago. Does that mean that we don't have any back office transactional roles anymore? No. People have just changed slightly. Going back to your kind of COBOL example, they have more, let's say, difficult roles. They're using more of their humanistic capabilities. And so, they just augmented their particular role. They're not doing the boring transactional stuff. Now they're dealing with the stuff that's slightly more complex. What we're going to see in the world of work as a result of generative AI is something very similar, except it's going to be in the realms of marketing and software development as opposed to no-code, low-code coding. We're going to see this in slightly more higher paid creative roles. And so, again, you're just going to have a co-pilot. And again, what the research is saying is that somewhere between, these types of roles are going to be somewhere between 15 and 40% more productive as a result of having a co-pilot. It's not saying that 15 to 40% of those roles are being removed. It's basically saying that they're going to be 15 to 40% more productive. So in theory, you will get more bang for your buck as a result of using technology plus people. Interestingly, in 2019, I predicted this. I wish I had predicted Gen AI, but I predicted that the organizations that would be most successful in future were not those who were replacing their people with technology, but by those who were marrying technology and their people together to create, I said cyborgs, but technology worker cyborgs, just to get an effect back then. But it's coming true. I still don't see, at least, for the next, and I'm going to say 5, 10, 20 years, a mass change in employment levels. You're just going to see a different set of roles, tasks, processes, responsibilities. And I think, as we've seen historically, as new technologies come out, new roles appear, new, processes, maybe some types of roles will be augmented, changed, removed, no longer needed, but new roles will come in. Now, interestingly, the key thing here is whose responsibility is it to keep the workforce trained, to keep them well educated, to ensure that they are still able to complete work? Because the last thing you want is to make work so hard that the vast majority of the population are unable to complete it. Because although we have different skill levels and skill capabilities as people, and so retraining, constant training, this change. Careers for life are, in theory, going to be a thing of the past, because although technology is moving at such a rate now, this is probably the slowest it's ever going to change at. Moving forward, it's going to continue to change. Exponential change basically means that, tomorrow will be a quicker change than today, which was quicker than yesterday. So although it feels like everything's moving really fast, it's only ever going to get faster as opposed to slower. So we do really need to rethink that. And I think it's an employer's and also, a public challenge to ensure that we take advantage of the technology, but we also don't leave people behind.
Exactly. And Wayne, as you were talking about this, it kind of reminded me of a study when we were talking about like digital transformation and organizations were kind of going through a significant change and transforming their organization. There was the example of taking a look at the banking industry when ATMs came into play. And the fear associated with that banks were going to be shutting down, everything was going to be automatic. There was no need for, bank tellers or anything like that. And the study showed that actually, after the invention of ATMs, the number of brick and mortar branches and banks increased exponentially, because what it did was it made the process easier for you to access your accounts, for you to access money, and therefore made it easier to be able to set up all these banks around the country. So I feel like it's going to be exactly a mirror of that, like as we kind of go forward. I think closing thought, Wayne, if you could share, what do you think are some of the potential blockers?
People and process. And interestingly, I think, I'm going to say process, but it's not, the transactional type processes. It's more how a business operates. If you think about how quickly an enterprise is able to change, it's like an oil tanker. Big legacy businesses don't change quick. So that's a blocker, right? Technology now is moving at such a rate. And the problem you have is there is almost a paralysis, because if technology is moving so quickly, when and where do you place your bet? Because historically, we make these long-term bets. It's like, okay, we're going to transform with this technology and, we're going to get a decade out of it. 15 years. Oh, we've had this technology 20 years. In today's world, legacy becomes legacy much quicker. And so, we need to rethink both the procurement of technology and services and also our implementation of them, so that we can be more iterative, that we can be more plug and play, so that we are able to keep up. You don't have to be bleeding edge here. You don't have to be bleeding edge, but if you're still working on technology that is 10, 15 years old, it might not even be open and be compatible with many of the newer technologies. And so we just need to get into a different mindset. And it is a shift, but it's people and process around this, around the procurement and use and the sunsetting of all technologies. Let's just get into a different mindset where we have no choice. We need to rethink how we how we work with technology, how we implement it, how we get value out of it, and how we quickly swap it out as and when it becomes end of life. And that process has to be a lot quicker. We're talking, it can't be decades anymore. It has to be 2 to 5 years, so that we're always able to take advantage of the latest. So that's kind of number one. And obviously regulation is probably number 2 as well. So I would suggest there's some fantastic people who are very, very into the legal side of AI that I follow. We see government regulations popping up all over the place. EU principles, US principles, even individual countries writing their guiding principles. There's a lot going on in that space, which I think, without a good understanding, again, confusion leads to paralysis. So I think there's a role to play there around, regulation, but also security. And, we've heard, at least in the early days of things like generative AI, an appropriate use of the tool, as in you feel like you're doing the right thing, you're using it for the right reasons. Unfortunately, you are providing training data for the rest of the world on your own IP. And so, there are challenges here around safe and secure usage. And I think many of these are starting to be overcome now. Certainly when you look at some of the major models now, you can, you have the cloud, the major hyperscalers who are providing a safe environment to use these capabilities, and you're having your own models to be able to train that are yours and nobody else's. And so, we are getting to come over some of these initial hurdles, but I think for many organizations, it's a lack of understanding of the regulations and the security aspects, which are kind of holding them back right now. And then last but not least, our own ambition. Thinking outside of the box, thinking beyond, being safe right now, and just thinking about, the expanding your horizons to take advantage of where technology is today and also in the future. So there is I think those 3 things would probably be the areas I would highlight as potentially holding us back.
Right. Wayne, thank you so much. I mean, this has been tremendous. And of course, we are literally just scratching the surface on so much that we can talk about this subject. So look forward to talking to you again soon, maybe on a future podcast. But thanks again.
Absolutely. Look forward to it. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for joining us on the AI to Z podcast with Anna Frazzetto. If you found value in today's episode, consider following for more insightful STEM discussions. We'll be back with another deep dive. Until then.